This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a very special return guest to the show, and that is John Edlredge. So he is a Christian author, counselor, and lecturer, and he is the New York Times bestselling author of a large number of books, workbooks, and group studies. But guys, he has written the seminal work in all of men's ministry, and that is the book Wild at Heart. And he has a new book out right now called Experience Jesus Really. It's this book right here. You guys can check that out in the show notes, and we're going to be spending a lot of time talking specifically about this book today. But also, you may be familiar with some of his other works, Beautiful Outlaw, Waking the Dead, Fathered by God, Resilient, and some other books. And he has been on this podcast 4 other times. Okay, so this is his 5th appearance. He's been on podcast 141, 193, 272, and 317. But this was a very different conversation from any one of those because the contents of his new book were very different. But we didn't start quite with the book. We waited about 15 or 20 minutes. But at the very beginning, we talked about something that we talked about off air and we talked about before. It's this kind of misunderstanding of what it means to be a warrior poet. Like, what exactly does that mean? And then that kind of dovetailed into our conversation about his new encouragement of helping men learn how to become Christian mystics. And as soon as you hear something like mystics or mysticism, it's like, wait a minute. What exactly are we talking about here? So we had to be, kind of carefully work through some definitions and kind of know exactly what we're talking about. But we were talking about specifically how men don't look to find refuge, right? They don't look to find refuge in the Lord or refuge in God. We're trying to find refuge in ourselves and our own power and our own accomplishments. And we don't really like prayer and we don't really like the quiet. So we really, really dig into a lot of that. And we dig into how we are kind of living downstream of the Enlightenment and we're disciples of the internet and how is that affecting us as it pertains to trying to seek truth. But then specifically we got into trauma. Like, what exactly is God able to do and how can he actually heal us using our trauma? Then we got into the decreation of truth. We talked about how Satan's using, the decreation of truth specifically in the gender revolution to really affect with us and mess with us. And then we get into a discussion about our essential problem in modernity. We talk about whether or not he thinks we're on the precipice of a true capital A awakening and some of the stuff that he's been working on in the future. So guys, don't need to do much more of an intro. You know who John is. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Guys, welcome John Edlredge for his 5th appearance. Back to the podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. John Edlredge, I would do my normal welcome, which is, John Edlredge, welcome back to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. And you'd say, oh man, great to be here. Everything. That's always great to see you, Kyle, all that kind of stuff. But we've got big news. We've got breaking news as of right now. This is your 5th appearance on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm pretty sure that's the record, aside from, Joby Martin, who comes on every month, and Mark Wayne Mullen, who comes on once a month. But in terms of just normal guests, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but your punch card, right, to where you get like a free 6th interview just got filled, son. Like, we don't even have to finish this. I just punched your 5th ticket. How do you feel about that?
Buddy, I'm honored. And it's been so cool to track with you over the years and watch this grow and watch you grow, Kyle. I'm super proud of you, man. You're doing great.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate getting into all that. And we're going to keep the good times rolling. But you said something off air, and you said something in a previous conversation that you and I had, and you mentioned like a term or a phrase, warrior poet. And I've seen that kind of bandied about. I've seen people say that. One of the funniest things is you got these super aggro guys that will mention something about warrior poet. And I think they're just saying it to sound nuanced and sound deep and sound like they've got something more than just beef jerky and dip and mud on their tires. But for you, it's kind of a different thing, especially talking to my audience, because there's a lot of cauliflower in my audience, a lot of guys with dirty jujitsu gis in the backs of their trucks in my audience. And so sometimes we lose the thread on what warrior poet even means. What does that even attach itself to? How we could even try to be that. And we'll have some through points in our conversation today when we get to the new book, but let's just start there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, this goes way back to my own martial arts training. So the development of the warrior heart is essential in masculine formation. It is just essential. Like the courage to push through. Hard conversation with your 16-year-old daughter, right? Or the career change, or you just got sacked. The warrior is what enables a man to finish college. It's what enables a man to show up, right? That's a huge, huge part. But you guys cover that in spades. Like that's your guys. That's your vibe. What I'm what I'm aware of right now in the world is there's this emerging masculine movement that is leaving out half of the masculine soul. Okay. And because you're not just a warrior, right? We're not just warriors. We're not just adventurers. George Gilder, the famous sociologist, has got a great line. He's like, if women didn't show up, we would all be naked nomads. Right. Cause like you get just guys alone, and let's go out and blow stuff up and let's go figure out what's on the other side of that mountain and, that sort of thing. But you're more than that as a man. You have a lover's side. You have a right brain. Let's just call it left brain, right brain, right? And there's the left brain, critical analysis, critical reasoning. Give me the content. Tell me what to do. I'll do it, But the right brain is more nuanced than that. And the right brain is intuitive. It's instinctive. It picks up more subtle messages in a conversation or in a situation. And I just wanted to bring this up early in the show, Cobb, because I think this will really help guys with what we want to talk about today. But I think as we're thinking about becoming more fully developed men, what does that look like? Well, yeah, you can go out with your 8-year-old son and ride dirt bikes, but you also need to be able to take your 8-year-old daughter out for dinner, right? And pursue her heart. You got to have a tender side, fellas.
So let me actually dig into that just a little bit more, because as I've said, and it's kind of like, a colloquialism, at least in my world, most men's ministries are just women's ministries that have been repackaged for men, right? That's kind of like, a thing that I say because we just like force men into these naturally feminine circumstances and say, do it, be good at it too. And and then we, castigate them when they don't do a good job. And so we've got the one problem of the default masculine guy that's not really in touch with his emotions or the right side of his brain. And we kind of need to bring him more to the tender warrior side of things. But then at least culturally, we see, and certainly in the church, we see a whole lot of the default feminine guys that, man, they really enjoy the music, right? Because it's in a key they can sing, and it's lyrical content that doesn't really bother them, right? Because it's okay. They love singing about Jesus as like their lover, and it's just, and for those guys, like they need jujitsu, like they need to be pulled over, and it's like, look, killing an animal and spreading its blood across your forehead doesn't make you a man, but it's like there's just something different. That's wild at heart. Gosh, we've been talking about this for a quarter of a century at this point, and so. For the guy, I guess talk to both sides, to the guy that is shut off from the right side or to the guy that is just right side, like tell them kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah. This is really good. Another way to think about it is, where is your frontier, fellas? What's your frontier? It's not what you're great at. You've got that wired. Okay. So if you're doing great at, masculine stuff, and you feel like you've got the courage going, and you've got the warrior going, then your frontier is the lover. Poet, meaning, you can also appreciate a mountain lake. Mm-hmm. When you're out there, you can also appreciate a sunrise while you're waiting for that bull elk to come in. I mean, I love my time in the field. I love it partly for the adventure, but man, I love the solace of nature. Right? The wind in the grass, that kind of thing. You've got to be a guy who can take that in, because that is nourishment. That's nourishment for the soul. That's his frontier, right? If he's only waiting for the bull elk, if he's not happy, if he doesn't get the elk, right? That's a problem. You got to be able to enjoy the whole experience, because hunting's like that, right? Yeah. Okay. But for the guy who's, been raised in a feminine environment. He's been raised in the public education system. Let's just call it. Okay. His frontier is the warrior. He's got to develop the warrior in him. And part of what we've told men, and this is what you guys have been pushing back against, beautifully, is for about 40 years now, we've been telling men aggression is wrong. Just period. As a category, it's wrong. And so this guy doesn't understand that anger that shows up in him sometimes at unrighteous stuff, the crazy things going on in the news, that thing in him that he's like, yeah, man, that's good. That is the emerging warrior in you. So for him, frontier, right? It is to, yeah, maybe he does need to go to a dojo. Maybe he just needs to go down to the Y and play hoops with some guys, because you get in a little game, right? And that warrior is going to come out, that competitive part of him, right? Or I'm going to start a company. I'm going to finally do it. I'm going to start my own thing. That's the warrior. So we're just saying, where's your frontier, fellas?
I think that's a good way of looking at it, because as soon as you couch it that way, guys automatically know. Like they don't need a deep dive. They don't need a shrink to walk them through. They know what their frontier is. They've just been avoiding it. And so speaking of avoiding things, let me bring up something that I've been avoiding. So I'm pretty certain I haven't mentioned this on the show. I mean, I've done over 700 of these, so perhaps it's slipped out of my mouth at some point. But in general, this goes back to something that you just said about, being able to appreciate, a mountain stream, or appreciate the hunt, like even if you don't get the animal. I am terrified of silence, like terrified of it. And I use that non-hyperbolically, and I think guys understand what I'm saying, because when things are silent, right, I don't like what goes on in my head. I've talked about me having kind of like sometimes my stream of consciousness can be pretty rough, but like my internal dialogue is really bad. Like I tried to explain this to a buddy of mine who's a licensed family therapist and counselor, because he was trying to make a point. He goes, Kyle, you don't walk into a jiu-jitsu tournament and expect to lose every match, do you? And I go, yeah, that's precisely what I think. I think I'm going to be choked unconscious and dropped in front of my weeping mother. That's what I think is going to happen, but I train like a madman to prevent the ultimate stick, right? I'm not really carrot. I'm way more on the stick side. And so when things get quiet for me, right before I fall asleep, or when you're on that hunt and all that, I don't like the stuff that's going on. So I've got these, what's in my ears right now, my AirPods, and I'm constantly consuming content because that's part of my job, right? So I can obviously, quantify it and qualify it. And I do all these different things, but I think there are a lot of guys that are in my role. Some guys just like the peace and quiet. And for the other guys, when it's quiet, there is no peace. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, guys, you live in a world that is savage on the human soul. It's just savage. The exposure to the content, the constant assault on your values, your concern for your kids, what they're learning in school, all of that. Like this, guys, this is a savage hour on the human soul. And you have got to take that seriously. So this is the poet side. Okay. It's warrior poet. The care of your soul matters. You can't just live on adrenaline. Right. And we all fear the quiet, and it's not just the quiet we fear, it's the aloneness. Right. Because if you're sitting with another guy in a duck blind, you're actually going to be okay. Right. If you're just dead silent, you're still going to be okay. Right. If you're sitting in that duck blind alone, that's the scary stuff. Okay. Because your soul needs care. There's fear down in there. There's self-hatred down in there. And you can't, okay, this is the exact thing. So why am I wearing a jacket this morning? Everybody's going, why is John sitting in it 3 layers in his home office? Because I cold plunged this morning and I can't get warm.
Yeah.
I can't get warm. Why do we cold plunge? Right? It's to push our bodies. It's to push, our brain. It's to develop that part of us that says choosing to do hard things is good for you, right? Like it develops resilience, which is one of your favorite words. Okay. The same holds true with pushing into your inner unhealed places. It's the exact same courage. It's the exact same choice. You're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to head there, but I like, this is my frontier, man. I got to finally face my rage. I got to finally face my fears, because the fascinating thing, like I've counseled a lot of dudes over the years, right? I've had a career as a therapist for almost 40 years now. And I've sat with fighter pilots. I sat with SEAL team guys who are scared of their wives. And you're like, what? Like you are a man's man. Like you have seen things I have not seen. What do you mean? Okay. Well, that's his frontier, because down in there are these unhealed places. And guys, this isn't soft woo-woo stuff, right? This isn't just therapeutic culture kind of thing. If your soul is not well, you're going to blow up at your kids, right? You're going to take a long lingering look at your personal assistant and think, hey, maybe a little bit of that would be good. You're going to blow your life up, fellas. It's as bottom line as this. So we cold plunge, right? We get out in the woods, we ride our bikes, we do the things we do, we work out. It's the exact same courage to go, okay, time to face my inner dialogue.
So with that, I've learned about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. That's the part of your brain that atrophies if you give in to your wimpy desires, which is to not do the hard thing. And so it's like, but there's a delineation. So the anterior mid-cingulate cortex will not grow if you're doing something hard that you want to do. So some of you love deadlifting. It's like your favorite. It's really, really hard, but you love it. Your anterior mid-cingulate cortex isn't going to grow because you want to do it.
Not anymore. It was growing in the beginning.
Right. It was growing in the beginning when you were learning form, when you were sore all the time, before you had your grips figured out, before all that. Cold plunge is one of those things that pretty much no matter how often you do it, every time you look at the cold water, you're like, I hate you, and you don't want to do it. But then when you get in, that part of your brain will grow and develop. But I want to take that thread just a little bit further, and hopefully this is okay. We'll certainly get into the new book. I think all this is super relatable. It's not just that I'm scared of what I'm going to think in the dark. I'm getting real honest with everybody here, okay? So John's pulling it out of me, so if you don't like it, blame John. It's not just that I'm afraid of what's going on in the silence and what's going on in between my ears. I am actually, I think, terrified of what God's going to tell me. Like, I think I'm terrified of God saying, hey, you got to do this, right? Because I feel like God talks to me as a matter of fact. It's not like, my son, I am calling you to this thing. It's just like, hey man, hey, you know you got to do this, right? And so how that works out in my life though, I will have times where, so last night's a perfect example. It takes me a while to set up, but I want guys to really understand this so that they know they're not crazy. So I'm walking through the bedroom. My wife's kind of chilled out for the night, but I got a lot more stuff to do because we got some things coming up and I got some boxes that need to be checked. But I heard it like a clarion call. I heard, go ahead and get some of her fancy foot lotion and, rubber feet. Just real quick. I mean, that's like a 2 or 3 minute thing. And so I go over and I grab, the fancy whatever, stuff for, rhinoceros feet or whatever these women are buying. And then I just put some on my hands and I rub her feet for a second. And it was just a nice moment. And so I feel like the Holy Spirit will just tell me something and I know I need to do it. And so I've just gotten in this habit of like, all right, cool. Like I'll just do it. And so I don't feel like God is just waiting to smite me, like whenever I finally get quiet enough for him to say something. But I think there are a lot of guys out there. Why do guys struggle with prayer? They're terrified of what that looks like. It's not because they don't have time, John, right? They can drive down the truck, without turning on or drive down the road in their truck without turning on the podcast or the music or something like that. And they can just talk to God like he's in the passenger seat, but we don't do it. I think that's an element of it. We're terrified of what he's going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say that gentle nudging, that's a great story because if you ignore that gentle nudging over and over again, you grow numb to it, fellas. And you do not want to grow numb to it. God does not like to shout, guys. And he doesn't like to cause, people talk about, the Lord just has to hit me over the head with a 2x4. Fellas, that's horrible. You do not want to be the guy that he has to clobber to get your attention. And so this is the same warrior poet thing. Cultivating the suppleness of your awareness, right, to those small nudges builds your ability to hear them next time and next time and next time. If you keep shutting that stuff down, and you just look at, guys, the spiritual life is every man's frontier. But you're not alone in that. You are not alone in that. You read the stories of the Old Testament, the New Testament. Paul's life, man, it's crazy. 3 shipwrecks, stoned in a city, thought he was dead. They got to let him down in another story out the window by a rope. He's like, I was in danger in the countryside. I was in danger in the city. I was in danger from my own people and in danger from the Gentiles. Like, life with God is wild, fellas. And yeah, we fear that. And here's why. I mean, bottom line, what we're talking about is men like control because we feel strong. Okay. So when I'm in control of my finances, I feel good, right? When I've got my truck running right, I feel so good. When we've got control of the situation, we love it. We know we can't control God. So this is every man's experience. This is every man's frontier. That's okay. You're not a screw up because that's true for you. But just like you want to push into, if you're benching and you want to up, how much you can lift, like every man needs to push into his spiritual frontier as well. That's all we're saying.
Hey guys, real quick. A consistent question that I am asked is, Kyle, what is your diet? People want to know if I'm tracking macros or if I'm doing keto or something like that, but I track one thing. I try to get 1 gram of high quality protein for every pound of body weight. And so for me, I eat red meat every single day. Pretty much for lunch, I eat a pound of red meat every single day to get over 100 grams of high quality protein. And guys, I want you to be able to get the same thing for you and your diet. That's why I want you to use the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, and that's Primal Beef. Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that partnered with Jocko Willink, yes, that Jocko Willink, to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from the other beef delivery companies? It's a combo of the following. It's all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no antibiotics ever, no mRNA ever. After slaughter, the entire carcass is dry aged and then hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another cool thing. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride in knowing that your purchase will help put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. Are you salivating yet? If not, it's probably because you're a vegan. Stave off veganism and try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle to get $25 off of your first order. Again, that's primalbeef.com, promo code Kyle to get $25 off your first order. And I think men can wrap their heads around, I want a bigger bench number. And so here's what I need to get there. And I even, I've talked to guys about, okay, they've got during COVID, I did all my 1 rep maxes and my 1 set maxes just to see, because everyone's bored. I got a home gym. And so it's like, how many pull-ups can I do in one set? How many push-ups? Like my 1 rep squat, 1 rep bench. And so my 1 rep deadlift was 450. And I was like, but 500 is a cooler number than 450. And then I started doing a little bit of research at what it would take to get from 450 to 500. Yep. And what it would have taken is a complete shift in how I approach fitness and really overall health. And I was like, that's not worth it. Adding another 50 pounds to my deadlift. John, I work out alone. I don't do lifting competitions. I'm not lifting to show off to gym bros or a gym crush or something like that. I lift alone, like in my garage. Do you know who will be excited by that number? A grand total of no one other than me. And it was like, man, the juice and squeeze ratio is just way, way off here. And I think all this really does dovetail into the new book. Because when you pitched me the new book, I was like, John, like, help me out here. Like, you do kind of realize my audience and all that. Because if you don't know, it is out now, guys. You can check it out. It's in the show notes. It's called Experience Jesus, really, finding refuge, strength, and wonder through everyday encounters with God. Now, normally I would ask you, why this book? Why now? Why you? But it's what you wanted to call this book that you chose not to, that kind of piqued my interest and kind of gave me not a little bit of pause. I was going to read it regardless, but it just kind of caught me askant, if you will. So let's start there.
Yeah, I wanted to call it Ordinary Mystics.
Yeah, and I mean, to anyone in our audience, they're just like, whoa, wait a minute, what's happened to John?
Yeah, and I knew that people would just freak out at that, and I don't want to lose the conversation till before it even gets started. But so the thing is, this is like really, really basic stuff. You go back through this remarkable record, Old Testament, New Testament, down through the history. When God gets a hold of men, he almost always takes them into adventure. It's always frontier. It's like, hey, Abraham, I know you got this really comfortable thing going on in Ur, but you're leaving. tomorrow, right? For a place you never even been before. And then he'll do that with a guy and say, I know you love, your PhD, and I know you love what you're doing in physics right now. Time to go. You're going to change jobs. I'm going to have you do something brand new. Okay. He always does this. He invites men into adventure. What's missing in the current cultural moment, oh my gosh, we just have this massive left brain approach to spirituality. And it's just content. Give me the great content. Show me the cool video. I need to hear who's got the killer sermon this week. And that's all good. And I listen to those guys and I love that. But it's not the same thing as encounter. Experience. Okay, so here's a story. So we're bow hunting elk a couple years ago in a canyon that I know pretty well. So I kind of know the terrain. I know how the elk behave. And it's late afternoon, but it's not time for anything to start happening, right? The magic's not going to happen yet. And I'm laying in the field in the sun, just like kind of napping, but also listening, sort of laying there. And God says to me, get up. I'm like, what? He's like, get up and get over there now. And what I do is I position myself right on the edge of the canyon and listen for the movement. And then, okay. So I hear the herd bull gets the whole herd up and he moves them out of the canyon. Now, that was not the plan. I'm in the meadow they're supposed to come up and feed in, right? So I'm in the ambush spot. They're gone. And here's what God says. He says, get in the woods. I'm like, look, I love you and I trust you, but did you notice the woods are empty now? Like, they're gone, Papa. He's like, get in the woods. And I've just learned, okay, right? Follow the nudge. So I go down, get in the woods, get in an ambush position. The entire herd turns around and comes back into the woods. And I nail an elk. Okay. The thing is encounter. Right? Like if guys begin to have actual experience of God, it changes the whole playing field. He's not just a theory anymore. He's not just like, get your morals together, quit masturbating or whatever. You're like, oh, no. Like I'm beginning to know God. Like I know what he's like. I know when he's around. I know when he's urging me to do something. And a lot of times the urging is joy, fellas. Like that was a joy to go kill that elk, and I was just following an encounter with God.
And that's really a big theme of the first chapters where you talk about, hey, we need daily encounters with Jesus. But to back up just a hair before we dig in even further, when people hear the word mystic, we don't know what that means, but we don't like it, right? It's kind of one of those words. And I'm always very, very cautious about putting the word Christian in front of a weird word. So like I'm a Christian, whatever. And so insert, weird word here. But in the book, you do try to make a delineating point between, okay, this is what a mystic is. This is what we generally understand as mystic. And here's what a Christian mystic is. Because some people will hear that, John, and be like, wait, are you saying be a Christian Buddhist? Are you saying being Christian New Age? Are you saying being Christian Enneagram lover? Like what they're going to be like, wait a minute. There's some issues here. So let's just define some terms here so that we can move forward from there.
Oh, no. Kyle, I'm doing it for exactly that reaction. I'm doing it for the wait, what? Because this is all white noise now. Come on, guys. If you live in the developed world and you're doing anything in faith or church, like you are got white noise of Christian content. And it's all pretty much the same. Say your prayers. Don't cheat on your wife. Kind of come help us out at church. It's white noise for most guys. Now, you throw a word in there like mystics and they're like, whoa, wait a second. But, fellas, just so you know, you go back into the history of the church and of men and women who walk with God. There's this whole line of people from Martin Luther to Thomas Aquinas, to, St. John of the Cross, all these guys, all the way back to St. Anthony. St. Anthony's life is wild, you guys. He was the first desert father. He leaves, he goes out in the wilderness and he lives in this abandoned castle. His life is crazy stories with God. Other people called them mystics. And it was a term of reverence at one point. You just substitute really deep person who knows God. You substitute saint, like somebody who's like, God, man, their life is just so awesome. and their character is awesome. That's what mystic used to mean. Now it means woo-woo, right? It's like, let's go in the woods and, do some ayahuasca or something like that and, trip out and find spirituality. I'm trying to take the word back, because what mystic invites us into is the poet side of the warrior poet. That's what I'm after, right? I'm after a more fully developed man and a more fully developed experience of God.
And so one of the lines you draw as a straight line is like, okay, when you unlock being a mystic, and I want to be careful, not mysticism, but when you unlock becoming a mystic, okay, it does lead you to the opportunity to find refuge. If there was one word that I would use, actually, John, to really define what this book is, I wouldn't use mystic. I would use refuge, okay? Because that comes up a whole lot in the book. In chapter 3, you talk about, well, you had a buddy that you brought up in the book. And this buddy, you're kind of saying some of the things that you've said right now, but he's like me. He's highly conscientious. He's also highly open. He's a get it doneer. We don't just get it done, John. We get it done early, and it's fantastic, right? That's kind of who we are. And that guy's like, great, John. So practically speaking, just how do I do that? Like, just tell me, give me the steps, give me the 12 steps to the whatever end that I need. Just tell me how I need to love God. Like, let's make it really pragmatic. How do I take refuge in him in 3 easy steps? I think part of the reason is personality. Part of the reason is we've been marinating in this culture of self-help, and self-help has to have steps to the end, because if you're on step 3 and there's 7 steps, well, we got to keep going, right? And also modern TED Talky preachers, it's not expositorily going one verse, at a time through the Bible. It's live your best life now, and here's 5 ways to do it. Here's our new series. It's 5 weeks long, and we're going to teach you how to be a, whatever superstar, Christian superstar, or something like that. And so we're being marinated in this type of ideology, and it leads to the issue. So talk to me about how that, kind of tapping in more with the mystic side, that could help you gain the refuge that we so desperately need.
Yeah. I chose Refuge. Refuge was going to be the original title of the book, even before Ordinary Mystics, because it is a lot about you remember as a boy how much you loved forts?
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Oh yeah, man. We'd dig holes. We'd build tree houses, or we'd just get out in the woods. And I still run into these all the time when I'm in the woods near our house. Some group of little boys have built a teepee, some little group of boys have built a little blind. The idea is every human soul needs to have that place that they go where it's not constant war. Right? Where it's not just on hypervigilance, everything's up to me. Where do you go to experience Psalm 91? He who dwells in the shelter, the fort of the Most High, will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Every human soul needs that. And every guy will tell you, this is okay, I'm going to go off on the workout thing. So what you learned about lifting and everything else physically is that recovery is more important than training.
Yeah, it's like steroids. That's what recovery is. It's better than steroids.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't recover, if you don't sleep, eat, rest, and not work out, then you'll start actually losing the amount that you can bench. Okay. The soul is the same. The soul needs a place of refuge. And for centuries, you guys like David, who's a major warrior poet, says, God, I have learned to experience your presence as a kind of refuge, a kind of fortress around me. When I get into that actual experience of your presence, my hypervigilance comes down, and I just get to breathe, and I get to recover again. Well, you don't get there with this high left brain, give me the 4 steps thing, right? You get there with the spiritual frontier you were talking about. I've got to go into the silence. I've got to go into the quiet. I've got to practice. Brother Lawrence, the famous Carmelite monk, he said, learn to practice the presence of God. Okay. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Brother Lawrence, because he's a fascinating guy. He was injured in war. He was not a monk, not even into his adult life. He was injured in battle. He had a limp for the rest of his life, took out part of his foot and his leg. And then coming out of the trauma, See, this is so huge, Kyle, because he comes out of trauma and he says, no, it can't just be war. I have to find a refuge. So he balances his life and he learns to practice the presence of God. Okay. That's what we're after. That's what refuge means. It's the shelter of God's presence. And guys, this is 5 minutes in a quiet morning. We're not talking about leave your job, leave your world, go be a monk. There is a way of shutting down the noise and just learning to, well, listen to the little nudge, right? That you were talking about. You listen to the little nudge, and the little nudge is going to invite you into shelter in God.
And so I think part of our struggle, John, is obviously we're living in this post-Enlightenment world where we can't take the writings of people 2,000 years ago that were in an oral culture. We can't take those seriously. It's chronological snobbery, as C.S. Lewis talked about it. But also you talk about early in the book about we're disciples of the internet. And so that causes its own myriad of issues in terms of distractions, in terms of how we don't just want the information. We don't just want to earn it. We want it right now. And we want to just like ask, Siri on our phone to do it. But you brought up the word trauma. So later in the book, chapter 11, you get into trauma a little bit. I want to read a quote from chapter 11 here. I've made intentional references to trauma throughout the preceding chapters because I do believe that humanity's deepest need is to find how union with God can address even our trauma. This is the epicenter of the book. So here we are 11 chapters into the book. Sorry, excuse me. And this is where you're talking like, hey guys, it was almost your coach moment. Like, hey guys, come in here. If you only hear one thing about what we need to do in this next play, shut everything else out. Listen to this. Why is trauma the epicenter? Why is that point the epicenter?
Okay, so you got a lot of first responders that listen to you. You got a lot of guys who are either in or coming out of military careers. They know exactly what I'm talking about. When you see stuff, when you experience stuff, when somebody breaks in your house, you may handle the moment, but afterwards it lingers in the soul. And then the neuroscience, it literally fragments, right? The hemispheres of the brain. Your brain stops talking to itself. Trauma is the major issue in the world today. Kyle, did you know that when, after 9/11, they did a survey of PTSD, and they discovered that men and women who watched it live on screen had the same PTSD as those who were there in New York.
Yep.
And you're like, what? That's Jack. No, guys. When you get on the news every day and you're exposed to all this horrible stuff and this stuff that just infuriates you, that affects you. Okay. So I'm so glad you brought up the trauma piece because this is the really, really simple part of it all. The soul is healed through union with God. You are half a being. You are literally created to be in union, like an ontological, existential, actual union with the soul of God. His soul, your soul, his heart, your heart, his mind, your mind. That union heals trauma. And this is really good news because, not every dude's got $10,000 in 2 years and a, famous New York therapist, right? Like, you can't just tell people, get a bunch of money and get to an expert and maybe you'll get better, right? That's horrible, right? The gospel, the good news is that as you cultivate union with God, your Father, your Son, Holy Spirit, Jesus, Holy Spirit, He is able to heal trauma. So if you go back and listen to my story, best man in my wedding, dead. First business partner, dead. Best friend for 40 years, dead. All of the close men in my life have been killed. That's trauma. And if you don't address that, and again, all your guys who have seen it, been there, experienced it, know exactly the thing is, you will start drinking. You'll use fentanyl. You'll start having affairs. You'll be deep into porn because the soul can't just hold this stuff. if you don't address the care of the soul, fellas, you're going to blow your life up. You're going to go medicating, and then the medicating's going to take you down.
So sometimes my inbox can be a little terrifying because I have no idea what type of a message I'm about to read. And some of the stuff that I've been burdened with, and I don't, guys, keep sending them to me. I'm not saying stop it. But when I look at my email inbox or my DM, sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, like what in the world's going on? I got a terrifying message from a woman that she knows that her husband has, access to me. And she's like, here's some of the things my husband is saying to me. And here's some of the things he's doing to me in my sleep. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And like, you bring your own wife into it to say, hey, and there's all these burdens. And what I naturally default to, John, is, okay, here's what you need to do. Yeah. It's not, here's the rest you need to find in the Lord. Here's the refuge you need to find. You need to do whatever. Because a lot of guys are like, again, I just railed against this a second ago, but guys aren't coming to me to vent necessarily. They're coming to me for help. And I'm a helper, right? So if you fall out of your wheelchair, I'm not going to give you an anecdote about the importance of getting back up. I'm going to help you get back in your wheelchair. You know what I mean? And so at risk of violating something that you said early in your book, to the man that is about to blow their life up, maybe they're even thinking about it. They're thinking about getting back into porn, even though they got it licked. They're thinking, terrible pun intended, no pun intended there. Or they're thinking about blowing up their life with an affair, blowing up their life with some sort of substance abuse or something like that. What do they need to do in that moment? Because you're saying, hey, they need to address it. They need to address it. We're all in agreement. How?
Okay. Revelation, Jesus gives this amazing invitation. He says, I'm knocking, open the door of your soul, I'll come in. What we mistake is he's knocking through the pain. He's not knocking through the gentle worship song. He's not knocking through the lovely service. He's knocking through your rage that's out of control. He is using the crisis to say, let me in to that particular part of your soul. Because what a dude will do, we all do this. We're like, yeah, God, I'm in. I'm in. I want to be a good man. I want to be a good father. But there are pockets, places, rooms, memories that we have not given him access to. We're like, oh, no way, not that. I'm not, no way. And he's like, yeah, well, that's what that'll blow up your life, right? So he's knocking through the pain, the fear, the addictions. He's knocking through all your medicating. And he's saying, give me access to that part of your unhealed soul. All right. And we're talking frontier, courage, risk. This is it, man. This is the scariest stuff on the planet. And all it takes, fellas, is you go, I'm desperate, God. Absolutely. I open this door to you. Please come into my rage. Please come into my sexuality. Please come into my trauma. And fellas, this is why we're talking about being mystics. This isn't principles and tips and techniques. The living God will walk into your soul. He will. And when he's in there, the healing can really get done.
And in all of that as well, John, there has to be a seeking of capital T truth. Not my truth, not whatever my lived experience has told me, but a capital T truth. And so let's just park in chapter 11. Chapter 11 is probably worth the price of admission for a lot of these guys because you talk about the decreation of truth. So let me read a decent-sized quote here. Satan unmakes or decreates the truth when he tells a lie. This is how the entire spiral of decreation began, for when Adam and Eve believed the lie and followed it, all creation was plunged into decreation. I could be wrong, but it appears to me that this process of the unmaking of God's beautiful creation was intensified and accelerated in this hour. Mental health services are at an all-time high. Never before have so many resources been available and yet are nowhere near catching up to the global need. Or we could point to the deconstructing so many young people have done with their faith. The problem is few have gone on to reconstruct it. They are wandering outside the refuge again, of God in the twilight of unbelief and despair. John, we've had people on this show that have talked about the deconstruction movement, and you're exactly right. We're always encouraged to deconstruct, to really get to bedrock with the intentions of building things back up, but then we just end up having a destroyed house and no shelter at the end of all of this rainbow. So talk to me about kind of the nefarious ends of kind of this decreation movement that we've all been experiencing.
Oh, yeah. Look what's happening to gender. Come on. The gender dysphoria thing that so many young people are in. And for them, guys, it's full on real. Like they're actually questioning literally like their creation, their created nature. Okay. You were talking about truth and refuge. So you listen, you go back to Psalm 91. And you listen to David in all of his refuge psalms. He did not write Psalm 91. We don't know who wrote it. But they say things like this: I will say of the Lord, you are my refuge and my fortress. You are my refuge and my fortress. Because the therapeutic culture has taught us that your feelings determine your reality. Okay? So if you feel like you want to have sex with that woman that you're not married to, you go, oh my gosh, I must want that. That may be the enemy, man, in trying to tempt you to blow your life up. Okay. Feeling safe and being safe are not necessarily the same thing, right? I mean, I have friends who have fear of heights, and I forget that when we're hiking, and I'll walk over to the edge of something and look down, and they're like, dude, back up. Okay. He's perfectly safe. He's 15 feet back from the edge, but he doesn't feel safe. Well, this is where truth comes in. You may not feel loved by God. You may not feel forgiven, but you have to start with the truth if you're going to make any headway here. You go, no, you are loved. You are forgiven. That's non-negotiable. Okay. You are loved. You are forgiven. That's taking refuge in the truth. You begin to let it build your reality around you so that your feelings don't just keep taking you on the roller coaster ride.
I think you're absolutely right, because we live in this moment where your feelings, especially if you scream them, have to be justified, because why would you otherwise scream? That's just kind of this thing. It's like your level of outrage is supposed to somehow equal your level of rightness, which obviously, if you're intellectually honest, is not something that you can do. But I want to go even a little bit deeper into the attack on truth. Again, I'll go back to a quote from chapter 11. This is a tender subject for many, sometimes heartbreaking, but it's important that we look at the unmaking of gender, because gender is named in Genesis as essential to human dignity. It is core to how we bear the image of God. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. When we see so many young people questioning their gender, when we behold an agenda to encourage the dismantling of gender, we see a kind of unmaking here as well, the dismantling of the image of God in humanity. Decreation has reached the epicenter. So I forget whose quote it is. It may be Chesterton or somebody, but it was like, when people stop believing in God, it's not that they believe in nothing. It's that they'll believe anything. And yes. So if you're going to attack truth, there's no more fundamental truth. So let's take a currently secular, very, very popular clinical psychologist, Jordan Peterson. And again, this kind of goes against young earth and all that, but that's not really the point. The point is like gender, like the dimorphism of animals, specifically mammals, is older than old. It's older than anything, because we don't have the propagation of any species unless you have male gametes and female gametes. Like that's just kind of technical. So if you can destroy that thought process in the mind of a human being, there is nothing that you won't be able to convince them. If you can convince them that a little boy actually is a little girl, because here's the other thing that they don't want to explain. Well, if they just are a little girl, there's no need for the hormones, are there? There's no need for the scalpels, are there? Because in that moment, they don't need to have breast tissue put into them or taken off of their body. They just are what they are, okay? Same reason, if I tell you I'm a ficus, that just means you need to water me. If I tell you I'm a couch, that just means you need to sit on me whenever you're tired, right? But that's not the world that we live in. And so that's probably one of the most nefarious things. Elisa Childers asked me on her show a couple of years back, if Jesus were alive today, which tables would he overturn? And I said the transgenderism thing, because it's a fundamental attack on what truth is and where truth comes from. So save me from my own sermon. Ready, set, go.
Well, he's messing with their heads. He's messing with their heads and he's messing with their feelings. Fellas, you have got to come to terms with the fact that you have an enemy and he's tearing the world apart. If you don't take the kingdom of darkness seriously, you're going to think every thought that goes through your head is yours. Okay?
Yep.
This is really good news, fellas. Not every thought that goes through your head is yours. So here you got these poor, vulnerable kids, and it's usually, oh my gosh, you can get into their trauma and single parent homes and all this stuff that adds to this, right? They're vulnerable to him getting in their heads and getting in their feelings. Him, the enemy, Satan, the evil one, the king, prince of darkness, and tearing their humanity apart. Okay. This is going on all over the world, right? That, oh my gosh, it's just madness. And now you've got the movement of AI assisted friends for young people. So now they're talking to a machine about their feelings and that sort of thing. Guys, like the whole move of the enemy on the planet right now is tear humanity to pieces, tear it apart. Do you think you're exempt from this, guys? That same assault on your thoughts, on who you are, on your identity, right? And you were talking about if you shout, it feels true. Well, here's the other thing. The core messages of your life were delivered with pain. That's why they feel true. So your dad walked out one day and said, you're such a piece of, you're not even worth staying here for. I'm gone. And you live for the rest of your life with, I'm basically a piece of, that the message was delivered with pain. You think it's true. How are you going to get out of that? Only with the truth. Only with the truth. You can't wait till your feelings change, right? You start with, no, you're a son of God. You're absolutely chosen. He adores you. Your father adores you. And you're not on your own to figure life out. You're not on your own. You have to start with these things to get out of the decreation.
And it goes even further than that because, okay, so we're seeking out truth. What is truth? Because there are things that people will say, typically very fundamentalists. They're like, whatever answer you need, it's in the Bible. I'm like, okay, who was the 14th president of the United States? They don't really like that response. It's like, look, the Bible is not, it's not a history textbook. It's not like a taxonomy textbook. It's not all those things. It contains the most important truths. And so another quote from chapter 11 here, all this to say, to be a human being in this hour is to be stained glass. Beautiful still in our brokenness, but fragmented nonetheless. How we heal human fragmentation is one of the critical questions of this moment, maybe the question. Now for the shining brilliance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so above every historical factoid or every trivial pursuit question or something like that, or you understanding trivia in your whatever selected area of expertise, the gospel of Jesus Christ ultimately stands above everything in terms of what capital T truth means and where it's taking us, right? Is the ultimate answer to origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Where did we come from? Why are we here? How can we tell the difference between good and evil? And where do we go when we die? So, John, give us the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And what most people don't know, when Jesus steps in Luke 4, it's his first public moment. He's in the synagogue. They hand him the scroll of Isaiah. He chooses a particular passage to announce his mission. He says, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. Well, what does he read? He reads Isaiah 61. I am here to heal the broken and set the captives free. The fundamental work of God is to get back to Eden. He wants to restore your humanity. He wants to restore the earth in the new creation. He wants to restore your marriage, your career, your calling, your mission, all of that. That most people don't understand that the gospel is good news because it's not just behave yourself. That's the Old Testament. The gospel is the soul is healed through union with Christ. That as Christ begins to literally recreate you, he's the integrating center of all things. That's what's so freaking cool, man. Like Colossians 1, it says he made all things, through him all things were made, through him, and he holds everything together. Well, guys and gals need to begin to experience that in their humanity and in their stained glass, that he is literally the reintegrating power of the universe. He's going to do it first with human beings, okay? And then he's going to do it with the earth.
And for anybody listening to this, if you've never put your faith in the gospel, because it's one thing to understand the gospel, it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to put your faith in it, right? That's what we talk about with Jordan Peterson. This is a man who has publicly said he believes that Jesus is God and he believes that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, but he has not put his faith in that for himself yet, right? He has not pashtuoed, he has not transferred his faith from himself into the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so if you're listening to this right now and you're feeling that pull, that is God talking to you directly, and he's calling you home. Take refuge, guys. Take refuge in that. Reach out to either one of us. We can obviously help get you plugged in, help get you to the discipleship that you'll need along this journey, but take God's free gift of grace. Take the offer. As we wrap up the book, I do want to get into chapter 18 because you're talking about our essential problem. So let me read the quote here. Our essential problem is this: we want two things that are in fundamental conflict with one another. We truly do want Jesus. We do. We also want a good life. It pulls on us every moment. And then a little bit later, the church in the West has assured folks that they can live two lives. You can have Jesus and you can have a wonderful life. In fact, this is God's will for you. It is not true. Now, John, I've been reliably informed that all I do is accept Jesus like I just compelled people to do. And then all of a sudden, my life is going to be rainbows and unicorns. All of a sudden, I'm going to, I have to give money to a fancy preacher first, but then I will receive a bunch of money. And there's stuff out there that I can just start naming and claiming, and that things are going to be awesome. Now, it doesn't really jive with a reading of any of the New Testament, folks, because if you read these people's lives, it's kind of rough. A lot of these people met some pretty bad ends because of their faith in Christ. But for your sake, or for what you're trying to say, why is it not true?
So I'm literally in a prayer meeting this week. And it's quiet and we're praying and I'm thinking about the vacation I want to take next month. The pull towards relief and just give me a break. And can I just buy that new thing? And that pull is constant on the soul. If you don't address that and hook that up to Jesus as part of your life, you hook it up to your Heavenly Father. Fellas, he loves you. Of course he wants to bless you. It doesn't mean you're going to get a bull elk every year. It doesn't mean you're going to get a 6x6 every year, right? It doesn't mean that it's always going to be great sex with your wife. It's just not how it rolls down. You are currently living in a war. You live in a love story, okay? God loves you, but you live in a world at war. And until Jesus comes in and finishes the total wipeout of evil, we're going to be living in this tension of, absolutely, God wants to bless you. He does. He does. And he told me to get in the woods and I got an elk. But I could tell you I got a lot of empty tags too. I got a lot of disappointment out there. And I've arrowed elk that we haven't recovered. It's heartbreaking, right? It's both sides of this right now. And if we are primarily committed to good life, right? You just make it sweet, make it great. You're going to miss out on the best story ever. He's got a much better story for you, man. You are needed in this fight. You have a critical role in the story, and it's not the latest thing you're buying from Amazon.
That's right. Well, guys, the name of the book is Ordinary Mystics. Just kidding. It's called Experience Jesus. Really, guys, you can check it out there in the show notes. But a couple of things before we go. I've asked a lot of people recently about this because, a couple of years back, we had the Asbury revival, which felt really artificial to me. It felt like they just tried to extend out a worship service, and then it just kind of took off. It had a mind of its own, right? But again, that's the skeptic in me. But if it's really a revival, you don't have to move it off-site and offer people Chick-fil-A sandwiches to make sure we can keep the worship set going. But it feels like there's a groundswell happening right now. You have Wes Huff going on the Joe Rogan Experience. So it's the biggest gospel conversation in the history of media. Okay. You've got Ayaan Hirsi Ali becoming a Christian. You have Russell Brand becoming a Christian. You have, atheists, right, that are out, like, a Douglas Murray or trying to think of some other examples, Richard Dawkins saying that he's at least a cultural Christian. You have Bible sales that are exploding. You have young people, especially young men, coming back to the Bible and coming back to church because they found the meanderings of the four horsemen of new atheism wanting. It's like it works when it's on the sheet of paper, but it doesn't work when you try to apply it in real life. And so I want to be careful using a word like this, but it feels like there is a capital A awakening that is coming. And I don't mean because America's special or anything like that. I'm talking about just in general across humanity. You have Christianity exploding in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. You have people in the Middle East in droves that are having Jesus visit them in their sleep, and they're becoming Christians in Iran and Iraq and Syria and all these different places. And so it's either, hey, we're so close to the end times, and he's calling his church and he's getting us ready, or we're in for an awakening. That's what it feels like to me. What's your read?
Yeah. And guys, if you're not seeing it yet, it's because it's hitting the West last. Okay. There was an iron curtain that fell over the West that really shut out the spiritual life. But this is exploding. What Kyle's describing is exploding all over the world. Here's what's taking place. Both spiritual realms are exploding all over the world. Wicca is one of the fastest growing religions in America. Okay. People are, doing ayahuasca and all this other stuff as well. Their hot yoga, their meditation. The spiritual is breaking out, is what we're seeing all around the world. You better choose the good side. Get on the good side. Because when this dark stuff breaks out, man, it is gnarly.
Yeah, you got to make sure you're on the right side of the ledger. And again, when people are like, I love it when they say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. It's like, yeah, well, demons are spirits too. So can you be more specific? And so we got to make sure that people really drill down to bedrock and we kind of get them to answer. But you also know the drill. Last question of the day. It's not what have you done for me lately? It's what are you going to do for me now? So we got this book. What else is coming from John Edlredge? What's coming from Wild at Heart? Next book coming up. What are you working on? What are you excited about?
Go, guys. If you haven't seen it, we released a film series on YouTube right towards the end of the year last year that are these 50-minute exquisite films of the stories of men's lives who are becoming whole, right? And it's blown up marriages and messed up sexuality, and it's all that stuff, fear, anxiety, depression, but we're showing stories. So I'd get on YouTube, I'd Google Wild at Heart series, watch those films. You're just going to love it.
So guys, check that out on the Wild at Heart YouTube channel. But John, that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
So good to see you. So good to be back. Thanks for having me back. You're very, very generous.
Keep writing books. We'll keep having you on. All right. We'll talk soon, John.
Okay.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed John's 5th appearance on the show. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got a link to his Amazon page where you can buy Experience Jesus Really, and a link to the Wild at Heart website. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.